Hey, thanks for clicking on the video. Today begins our first look at the Sundered Doctrine weapons. We already looked at Finality's Augur, so if you're curious about seeing that exotic heavy tested, check out my previous video. But for this video, we're going to be looking at Unloved, a strand heavy burst hand cannon. We'll be looking at all of its possible roles, the downright insane origin trait, and what incredible synergies it has access to right now. Which, out of all the dungeon weapons, I think you'll find Unloved to be a very popular one. And if you're curious about just one section, there are timestamps down below, and if you find this video useful at all, a subscription would be greatly appreciated. I'll have more reviews and builds coming out very soon. So starting with the weapon itself, it's one of very few heavy burst hand cannons, and the first to have strand as its damage type. Now I'm bringing attention to its frame because this is particularly important when comparing its effectiveness to other weapons we might have already married ourselves up to. What I mean by this is how it ranks in primary weapon DPS versus minors and elites. I'm going to flashbang you with Mossy Max's DPS chart, and you can see that heavy burst hand cannons are nearly the highest DPS primaries in the game against minors, and they are the highest against elites. Not to mention that a very common use for heavy burst hand cannons is as a DPS monster when paired with Lucky Pants, but whether or not that's the play with Unloved will depend on the perks, which gives a smooth segue into just that. So looking at our third column, we have Dragonfly, Outlaw, Hatchling, Rapid Hit, Killing Wind, and Heating Up. And then in our fourth column, we have Kill Clip, Closing Time, Frenzy, Elemental Honing, which is a new one, Paracausal Affinity, and Tear, another new one. Starting with the perks I'd actually consider rolling on this weapon in the third column, Dragonfly and Hatchling are interesting options for increased add clear lethality, and then Outlaw and Rapid Hit are our standard reload options. But I'm going to stop us right here, and we're going to be completely honest for a second. It has been a very long time since I've actually preferred a reload perk to something that makes the weapon kill harder, and Unloved here is following suit. So with that said, let's take a look at Dragonfly versus Hatchling. Starting with the former, also you might notice this isn't the same gun, but that's because I don't have a roll with Dragonfly yet, but I do have bold endings, which is the same frame and same damage. So here on a heavy burst hand cannon with Dragonfly is the obvious explosion that I was able to get to deal about 18,000 damage. So admittedly, it's not that much, and that was at the center of the blast radius. But if we're gonna take my preconceived superior option, Hatchling, and compare it here, well, we have one simple effect. A Threadling spawns on every precision kill or every triple kill, that Threadling doing 19,000 damage. Granted, in this clip, that's with a 20% buff from Paracausal Affinity, so by itself it's just a bit less than that. Regardless, the comparison here is that a Dragonfly's explosion is about equal to a Threadling detonation, and that's when you get the Dragonfly explosion to go off right next to another target. Threadlings auto-seek, and pretty much guarantee damage, which in my mind makes Hatchling way more valuable than Dragonfly. So back here with the perks, in the third column I'm pretty comfortable recommending Hatchling over anything else. As you might have noticed, we don't have anything like Force times the Charm for that aforementioned Lucky Pants DPS stuff. But if we turn our focus to the fourth column, the big ones here are Frenzy, Elemental Honing, Paracausal Affinity, and Tear. Now, similar to the last group of perks, I kind of want to split these up. The top three are all fairly similar damage perks, that being perks that offer benefits with extremely easy activations. Frenzy is a 15% damage increase for just being in combat. You also get some reload and extra stats too. Moving down, Elemental Honing would be between 2.5 to 35%, but an average loadout is going to sit around 20% at all times due to its activation on dealing unique elemental damage. And then Paracausal Affinity is a 20% buff that we can actually look at. Here we can see that with a single kill, we proc Paracausal Affinity, and all it needs to be to keep this buff rolling is kills with dark damage. So I can even use my heavy or dark abilities, or most easily just the weapon itself. But realistically, this perk and the other damage perks are extremely similar in potency, and the ideal perk for you is kind of just up to your preference. But next to these damage perks is Tear. This is again a new perk, and looking at it in game, it reads Precision Final Blows cause nearby targets to become severed. Looking at that, it's actually a lot like Dragonfly, but instead of damage, we get that strand debuff. Sever is actually really strong, increasing our survivability a lot when taking damage from severed enemies. But I do think I prefer Slice for my severing needs. That way you can actually use it when you need it. But now, before laying out some god rolls and what crazy synergies exist right now, we also have the origin trait Subjugation, which I'm gonna be honest guys, this is the reason any of these dungeon weapons are actually worth grinding for. Subjugation reads, weapon adapts to targets. When dealing damage to weak targets, shots explode. To strong targets, targets become exhausted, and then you get flint resist against guardians. Now, looking at this perk in-game against red and yellow bars, which is 99% of what you're using this hand cannon against, you get this extra damage instance of about 600 damage, or about 1200 if you consider the full shot. And if we look at another Mossy Max tweet, there's going to be links below to his stuff, we can see it checks out to be a 27% buff on body shots and a 12% buff on crits. This perk is straight up a second damage perk that fully stacks with everything else on this weapon. And then the second part, moving on from the crazy benefit of increased damage against powerful targets, it's a less bit incredible, only exhausting them, which decreases their outgoing damage by about 10%. So now then, considering everything that rolls on this gun, what are we looking at when it comes to a good roll? Simply put, in our third column, I'm running Hatchling every time. And in the fourth column, I think my choice would be either Frenzy or Paracausal Affinity, with me leaning a bit more towards Frenzy for the passive stat boost that it offers. The reload at base is pretty bad on this hand cannon, but Paracausal Affinity is also a near infinite 20% damage boost that I would also run. Regardless though, if you're running a damage perk, that's going to compound with Subjugation and give you a very lethal weapon. And that's exactly what you've been seeing with the background footage. This is my Hatchling Paracausal Affinity roll, and it feels really good. I think most of the feeling is carried by the origin trait, since I usually don't like heavy burst hand cannons for dealing with fodder. Another thing making this weapon feel so good is actually 3 artifact perks that exist right now. Deep Alchemy exists to straight up boost our stats a bit, but the big ones are Unraveling Orbs. They give us unraveling rounds whenever we pick up an orb, which also means we can pierce barriers, and then Horde Shuttle, which causes unraveled targets to spawn even more threadlings. These 2 perks just combine to make any strand weapon feel so good, and it's not just Unloved for sure, but Unloved benefits like any other. And then another synergy worth mentioning that we kind of touched on already is the obvious Lucky Pants synergy. We don't have Force times a Charm or Vorpal or any ammo generating perk, but you don't really need that with the rework that hit these exotic pants last episode. You can now run them as a pretty much just passive exotic if you're using a hand cannon at all in your loadout. And Lucky Pants with Unloved's intrinsically impressive DPS is going to work fantastically. If you were thinking about trying to bring this hand cannon into in-game content, this is definitely a synergy worth checking out, especially since again it stacks with everything we've mentioned. Unraveling Orbs, Horde Shuttle, our Ordnance Trait, and whatever perks you've got, Lucky Pants is just going to make that even better. Unloved has been an absolute blast to try out, and easily the best feeling heavy burst hand cannon to date, for running and gunning that is. Warden's Law still takes the cake for DPS. But of course, this gun comes from Sundered Doctrine, which I'm not sure a lot of people have dove into yet. If you have, let me know down below. I'm really curious to see if you have a god roll yourself and what you think of this hand cannon, or any of the other weapons for that matter. I think my next weapon review is actually going to be in the shotgun, because that thing has some very interesting perk combinations. But with that, thank you so much for getting this far into the video. Your viewership is greatly appreciated. On the road to 13,000 subscribers, and I would love to have you as part of the community. If you want to support me and support the channel, a like, a comment, a subscription goes a very long way. You can also join if you want to go the extra mile. But if you want to support me, you can't think of a comment down below, Unloved. And with that, as usual, I hope you are having a great day, and I hope to see you around.